Take your seats, movie fans. The film's about to start. Welcome to Craft of Services, the show where we look back at the bad films of cinematic history, the movies that critics rejected, but audiences embraced. I'm your host, Aaron Coker. I'm also the host of the Just Enough Trope podcast and the Enterprising Individuals podcast on this, the Just Enough Trope network. You can find out more at justenoughttrope.com. Joining me on the show today is Matt Gamble. Matt is the general manager at Karasoda's Showplace Icon Theater in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. He's also the editor-in-chief of Where the Long Tail Ends, a film criticism and industry commentary blog, and he's the host of his own podcast, High and Low Brow. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me about High and Low Brow.
It is a themed podcast that we started a long time ago with a fellow movie friend, James Gillum. We basically have a theme that we select for each episode and watch two movies that fall under that theme. So if you want to do like buddy team ups, it could be something like Seven Samurai
Sure.
and, Three Amigos or whatever it is.
That's about as high and low as you
yeah,
can get.
and it's a lot of the times we kind of use it to try and find movies that we've never seen that we think fall under the theme and then kind of react to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more a focus for us to try and find like those kind of lost in the cracks. Like both of us grew up parsing through like VHS shelves at our movie store,
absolutely, yeah,
and spending an hour to find that perfect movie.
Yeah, and
so it's kind of falling in that kind of zone of what we want to do.
Yeah. Finding the perfect one is a great comment because you never really do. And back in those days, I mean, I hope our listeners are probably old enough, but if they're not old enough to remember Blockbuster or even the local movie shop, the video updates or the Hollywood videos or what have you, and just sort of like they say, like you can judge a book by its cover, you shouldn't. Just seeing like the crazy art, it's whatever it draws you in about that VHS cover,
Yeah, the VHS cover was really almost always what you had to go on. And then the two or three screenshots they had in the back, and you really had to guess from that. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain generation where that's what we did. Like we instead of going to the library, we went to the video store.
Oh yeah,
and sat there for 2 hours. Like I've told my wife there's a lot of movies I know a lot about simply because I've read the back of that cover.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know how many times, even though I've never seen it.
Absolutely, yeah. Have Blockbuster card will travel.
Yeah.
My friend had a Blockbuster card, and it was the no restriction. There was no, so he could get whatever. I didn't because we weren't a big movie family, so I got a lot of my movie stuff by proxy. But I used to read the newspaper because I was a dork every Sunday. But I'd get the TV Guide as well, and I'd go to the back of the TV Guide where they'd have, in the listings, such and such a film, whatever it is, and then you flip to the back, and this is what it is. And I'd read all the synopsises, cover to cover. So there's a ton of movies that I'd never seen, but I was like, oh, right, of course, that's got Burt Lancaster or what have you.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff where I'll just be like, oh, yeah, that has this, and this. I remember that. I haven't seen it, but I totally know all about it.
Yeah, and as a film fan, I'm sure that you're aware of the phenomenon where it's like you've seen a bunch of stuff, you feel like you're an expert at this, that, or the other, but there's just still... There's stuff that you haven't seen.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I am in this industry because I love film. Like I love movies. I love being a part of it, and I remember how important going to the movies and seeing like those, like the movie that kind of transformed me. Of course, was Star Wars, but like Red Dawn was the first VHS movie, which blew my mind that you could take a movie home and do that.
Yeah,
like, these kinds of moments were really special to me, which is part of the reason why I'm in the film industry and exhibition, is that I like being the person that can give that moment to other people.
Sure. This is a complicated question for any film fan, but do you have any favorite films or directors, genres, actors?
I'm a genre film fan in general, so I tend to gravitate towards horror sci-fi. I like documentary a lot. But like... I mean, my favorite film all time is M, which is a Fritz Lang movie.
Mine too.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. Like, I could talk for hours about.
Come back, please. Well, it's very highly rated.
Yeah, I don't think it fits in this one, but like, yeah, I mean, Kurosawa is I'm a huge fan of Kurosawa, of course. But like, yeah, at the same point, like, Meet the Feebles is probably in my top 100 at some point. Like, there's.
Same. With Simpatico so far.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very much like my reaction and my visceral reaction to a movie.
Sure.
And then from there, if I really, really love it and I think it's a great film, I might look into it more and try and find out, like, what are the themes? What are the concepts? What's it trying to tell us?
Okay.
But I think there's plenty of movies where it doesn't have to be about a lot. You know, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a movie that's pretty cut and dry on what it is.
R.I.P. Toby Hooper.
Yep. But it's a brilliant, beautiful movie.
Well, beautiful.
I would argue strongly it's beautiful.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, to me, like those kinds of movies that draw you in and get you watching and want you to find the next one that'll give you that same kind of rush.
Yeah, absolutely. I love M, and I'm also a comic fan, and I had this dream for a while. Maybe I shouldn't say this because I could still do it, but I wanted to do an adaptation of M to the world of Daredevil.
Oh, that would
and
work.
so have Daredevil tracking down this serial killer or whatever, this child killer. Then you got the cops on the other side, maybe Ben Urich from the papers, and then you've got the Kingpin. They got to take care of this guy because he's messing everything up for them, and it's just an
it would work
like
really
that.
well for Daredevil, shockingly well.
Yeah, I got about halfway through and was like, well, like most projects, it's kind of fall apart. Maybe someday. How long have you been in the movie theater business?
16 years.
Wow.
So it's what you call a career now.
I would guess so. It's a long hobby, if not.
I love it. Like I've run theaters for most of the last 14 years or so. And I've worked at a couple different theaters in town, and I've worked for a couple different companies, and I love it. Like it's a blast. Like whether it's mainstream or whether it's art house, and I've worked at both. Like having people come to the movies and that moment when they come out and want to talk about it, I live for that.
Yeah. On my last show, I had a guest who had worked at Blockbuster at a video store. And it seems like working at a video store or working at a movie theater is like the one of two options for film buffs who don't actually get into producing films. What do you think film buffs get out of working at a movie theater?
I mean, most of it is the talk about the film, or turning someone on to something new. I think it's very similar to music lovers, like the idea of here you go, we're pushing something to you. Like this is something cool. Like, Sing Street, I think it was last year it came out. Like I told everybody that came through the doors, this is the movie you should go. If you want to know what to go see this. This movie is awesome. Anything like that, any kind of new weird movie where I'm like, this is actually legit good that you may not try. I want you to go see this.
That's
and
cool.
Then come tell me afterwards if you liked it.
That's cool.
That to me is what it's about. And it's, my family will email me stuff like, what should we go see?
Oh,
what should we go,
okay.
all this kind of thing.
Mine does too, but they never like my suggestions. So.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of, for me is figuring out what the person's tastes are and then changing my recommendations based on that. As much as I would love to go see X, Y, or Z, I'm not, that's not always going to work depending on who the audience is. And that's kind of more my job is I have to figure out what movie they should go because I would like them to come back again and watch another movie.
Sure. I wish that was my experience when I worked in a movie theater. I worked at one for, I don't know, maybe a summer. It was the movie theater at the Mall of America back when it was General Cinemas.
Okay.
And it was 97. I'm dating myself, but it was 97. And it was the worst movie summer ever. It was Godzilla. There was nothing good out that year.
Yeah, I mean, I worked... when I first got into film, I worked 2 summers at a Marcus Theater in 94 and 95, which were not great summers either.
No. Well,
we had Twister, and we had the summer season wasn't great, but there was other stuff around.
Yeah.
And it's a different job when you are cleaning up popcorn and
or serving it.
Yeah. That's a completely different job, and I certainly enjoy that too. I've been lucky enough though, since I've been back in it when I was an adult, I've been a manager and I've worked at a lot of different companies where the managers and the staff that work there are really passionate about movies and are in this industry because we love movies and we like sharing it with people.
Sure. That was not my experience at the General Cinemas at the Mall of America. And also the stupid thing was the only benefit you really get is free movie passes.
Yeah.
And it was a second job for me, so I was so busy. I never used one.
Yeah.
I never got to go to a free movie one time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I have the keys, so I can go in whenever I want.
Sure.
And kind of throw something on, and I do it, once a week or so.
Sure.
But, yeah, I mean, it's no secret the movie industry does not pay well.
Yeah,
and
at least at that level,
and
sure.
And you work weekends and holidays, so your chances to go see movies when your friends do is not really all that common.
Right.
infrequent.
Yeah, no kidding. I'd love to turn this into a commercial for Showplace Icon. I mean, it really is my theater of choice, and it isn't just because I live in kind of West Minneapolis, close to it. Like every time I go there, I'm always impressed at how this is so basic, but like how clean it is, and like how efficient it is, and everybody's nice there, and there's all these options, like it's reserved seating, and if you want, there's the VIP options that let you have connection to, you get food, drinks, you can take that into the theater, and the sound quality is great. Like I kind of really discovered it a couple years ago, probably for with these Marvel movies or something like that, but I was going to see it, like a 3D, nice Dolby sound and stuff like that. It's like a great theater. It's really neat.
We try.
So modest. Do you have any like wacky stories from working in the theater industry?
I have hundreds that I'm probably not allowed to tell.
Oh, okay. All right.
But
all right.
yeah, there's lots of gross things that I've cleaned up. There's lots
God.
of weird things we've thrown people out for, and yeah, I mean, you work in weird hours, late at night, and strange people come out late at night.
Oh, sure.
Like that's kind of what happens, and
Yeah.
and on top of it, it's a volume business. Like I have helped literally millions of people go to the movies.
Sure.
So I have seen all manner of person come through the doors.
Well, as long as you keep running it as well as you do, I'm sure people are going to keep coming through the doors.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. As long as the studios make good movies, like it's.
Oh well, that you
that's
can't control.
That's a whole nother problem.
Yeah, right. Well, the name of this show is Craft Services. On every episode, we look at a film that's poorly rated, generally lower than 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, but one that's well remembered, or I guess in this case, has a completely bonkers story attached to it. Before I get started, I want to say that this podcast is not in the pocket of Big Tomato. We're not endorsing Rotten Tomatoes. We're just using it as a metric in this case. Although, Matt, you probably hate Rotten Tomatoes because apparently it's killing the movie industry.
I think that's the dumbest excuse I've
what
ever
is
heard.
What is the argument behind that?
I think that is like bean counters at the studios trying to find a reason to justify
to keep the jobs.
Yeah, that they greenlit just shit.
Yeah.
Like just reviews have been around forever, like forever.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it used to be like you had your critic in the city, and we have two pretty solid ones in at Star Trib and Pioneer Press, like, and that's who you read, like, especially when I worked at Landmark. And we did all sorts of foreign films and tiny indies. Like people would just come in and go like, what was the star rating? Is this good?
Okay.
Because you knew nothing about it. These were tiny films. These aren't giant Marvel blockbusters or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I just think it's ridiculous. Make better movies. Like I don't, that's really what it comes down to. Like there's so many examples this year is if you made a good movie,
Oh yeah,
the people came out. Like Get Out is a tiny film.
It made a lot of money.
And it made a ton of money.
Yeah.
And it made it through word of mouth where people went, this is really fucking good.
Yeah.
You got to go see this. Like the idea that, and Rotten Tomatoes certainly helped that. Like, I mean, it certainly has an influence, but the idea that it kills it or cripples it, I think is just ridiculous. It is the quality of the film.
I think you're right. I think it really is a litmus test for the overall quality of the industry because they're saying that this is the worst movie year in like 20 years or whatever. And yet at the same time, you've got something like Get Out, which has made a ton of money. You got a bunch of really good, possibly smaller movies that are great. And then you've got all these big movies like Transformers and whatever that have just crashed and burned.
Yeah, and there's been big popular studio like Guardians of the Galaxy made a ton. Wonder Woman made a killing.
Yeah, Wonder Woman, yeah.
Beauty and the Beast made a killing. Like it's not like giant properties aren't selling.
Right.
It's that Transformers 47 didn't do anything. And like how many times do we have to go to the Caribbean to watch Pirates? Or how many times do we have to do like some of this stuff is just so tired and old and you just go, who cares? Like they're not even like clearly Pirates of the Caribbean is not made for the US. It is made for foreign sales, same with Transformers.
Yeah.
So then to crap on Rotten Tomatoes because you made a business decision that you had nothing to do with U.S. box office just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, leave the tomatoes alone.
Yeah.
Totally random question. I know that Netflix is a competitor for you guys. You know, all streaming services. Everybody keeps saying that you guys are beset on all sides, but because people are watching movies on their phones and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that there is a place for your industry going forward for the next 100 years? Like
I mean, I might have a slightly unique take on it. Like, as someone that consumes movies all the time and in any format that I can find, like, to me, I don't view Netflix as so much as a competitor as just another way for people to get into movies. Like I see it as much like if you love movies, there is a certain experience about going and seeing it on the big screen that these others can't match. Like they can certainly have good content, and they all do. Whether it's Hulu or Amazon Prime or whoever pick your poison.
Yeah.
I feel like the movies, it's a shared communal experience that I think is really special. It's part of the reason why I'm in it. Is it going to always be like the driving force in the industry? That I don't know. I don't know if anyone really knows. Mm-hmm. And that's, it could transform into like how the music industry, where it's like concert going, where it's this bigger thing for bigger acts, and maybe it's tiny little stuff for smaller acts.
Sure.
Like, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, they said the phonograph would kill live music performance. And they said that cinema would kill theater, and that's happened. So.
And well, I mean, and they talk about like television killing theater, and it's like it's a different style of storytelling.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anyone that like loves television that goes, well, I don't watch any movies. Like that's just not.
Yeah.
If you like that kind of visual storytelling, you'll consume both. It's just a matter of how frequently you go out to the movies.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for those VHS tapes at Video Update, I never would have seen all the Mad Max films, which would get me into the theater to see Fury Road.
Yep.
So, yeah. Well, today's film is a fascinating one, and it stands, I think, often it's described as one of those great cautionary Hollywood tales in the vein of like an Overnight with Troy Duffy, or even like a Lost in La Mancha type situation. Geez, what the hell happened kind of story. And of course, we're talking about The Island of Doctor Moreau from 1996. It's at 22% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a 4.4 on IMDb. That's not great. And it doesn't, as far as I can tell, have a Metacritic score.
I believe that.
Yeah. I like Metacritic.
I do too. I actually think Metacritic is better than Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, and someday I'll have an expert on the show to explain how the homogenization, or the aggregation works. But somehow for me, it seems a little more accurate, or at least a little more honest.
Yeah, I think Rotten Tomatoes to me seems very pass-fail-y, while Metacritic is more like this is on a grade scale.
Here's the actual score, and here's how they median out or whatever.
And then it's like an average of each individual score.
Yeah. And something you get, I think, from Metacritic, and I don't work for them, I can't really speak for them, is that I think it's more contemporary reviews. Because Rotten Tomatoes, for instance, one of these days I want to do Blade Runner on the show, because it qualifies. It was not well received when it came out. There's no way that it got the 98% that it's got on Rotten Tomatoes now. And I think Metacritic just doesn't have a lot of things on things like, for instance, Dr. Moreau, because nobody has gone back to do one of those look back, glowing, hand-jobby reviews of Dr. Moreau. Well, we're going to talk about that for sure. It came out on August 23rd in 1996. It was directed by, and here's the point of contention, John Frankenheimer, but of course there's another guy involved we'll talk about in a little bit. It made about $49 million on a $40 million budget. I think if you ask a producer, they'd say it was a failure. If you ask a bean counter, they'll say, made our money back, I guess. It's sort of a push. This is the subject of an entire other movie.
Yes.
Which we will try not to just make this whole podcast
Yeah, I mean,
about.
I think we can recommend to watch the other movie.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We can recommend to watch it, and we'll probably draw from it, but we're talking, of course, about Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Life, which is a David Gregory documentary detailing the ins and outs of this production and what exactly happened. But we're going to give our own version of that right now. Did you see this in the theater?
No, but I was working as like an usher and stuff the summer before when they first started like putting up ads and stuff like that and pushing it. Like this was a big.
This is
supposed to be a big release.
Yeah,
I mean Val Kilmer was a superstar at this point. Brando was, of course, a huge name. Mm-hmm. Like this was supposed to be a giant blockbuster film.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember seeing it. I have no idea why I actually saw it, except for there were a lot less films back then just at the box office, and if there's something even remotely genre or horror related, I'd probably go see it. But I didn't have a where the long tail ends to tell me the story of the film, so I didn't know any of that going in. I just knew, okay, adaptation of the book.
Yep.
H.G. Wells, from 1896. which I was into. I was into Wells, and I thought, okay, this will be a thing. And little did I know exactly what I was going to get into. I should mention that Lost Soul is 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I believe that. It's a good movie.
It is good. I watched it in preparation for this, actually, and it's really good in terms of what you want from a documentary, which is let's get the story and let's also get it from all sides.
Yep.
But as far as the production goes, I don't know what I wanted them to do, like
CGI
graphics and stuff.
It's 20 years later, and they're doing it's a talking head doc.
Oh, definitely, yeah, which is fine.
Yeah,
but I mean, like the 100% to me says like people hated the movie we're talking about, but they were really interested in the story.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Like, I think it's people just going like it's a train wreck. Like, and it's a train. Yeah. The movie was a train wreck from the moment it was green lit.
Oh yeah,
like the amount of craziness. It's so hard to keep track of who is what role and at what point because it's all swapping like crazy.
Yeah,
and that's in the first 20 minutes of the movie. Like, and you have certain people. You know, Rob Morrow, who has a prominent role in the documentary, isn't even in the movie.
He's not in the movie
because he was only around for like 2 days.
Yeah, I don't know if they even shot anything with him in it.
I don't know. But his story is fascinating. You're just like, oh my God.
It's a crazy story. And one of the things I wonder about, one of my problems with the film in general, and this is just totally throwing it out there, is that I'm not really sure what the theme of the story is. Like, what is the movie really about? Like, Wells was a satirist, and he was satirizing. He was coming off a hot run of a couple books that were all satirizing Victorian culture, ripping into British society, colonialism, and things like that. And I just don't know if those themes really translate, or I guess in my opinion, nobody has found a really solid way to make those themes translate to now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's playing a lot with like the concept of man playing with things it shouldn't be, especially like the God King kind of concept, which is
well-trod territory at this point.
Yeah, and I think the movie does a really bad job of playing with that. And I think like there's been a couple different adaptations of Dr. Moreau,
a whole bunch.
They're kind of all over the board on how well they've handled the subject. It feels like a really like it's this tiny book. It's what 180.
It's not very long.
Pages. And it just seems like it for whatever reason people haven't been able to figure out like what makes this story compelling because it should be.
Except just cool animal people.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really telling. Like, I bought the Blu-ray so we could do this show, and like the primary thing, on the cover art is effects by Stan Winston, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's really all they got on this movie.
Pretty much
is that's really what they had. That's what they sold. That's what they probably pitched it on, and that even like nowadays, like that's really all there is that holds up. Like because the themes, the actual movie that I watched is really boring. Like it's really bland and boring. Like that's my biggest problem with it is it's not compelling.
No, there's a setup that's pretty good, and then the middle just falls out. There's nothing happens in the middle, and then it's just a big rush to the end. Like once Brando,
it has like
parts.
It has a real like story problem in the middle where it feels like scenes are missing, which is what causes the end reaction. Yeah, like once you watch the documentary, you're like, oh yeah, there's probably like 3 or 4 gone. Like because it makes this massive jump in the middle of the movie. Where suddenly, where it goes from these creatures starting to realize they have their own agency and can kind of do anything, and then suddenly they're in the middle of a rebellion. Like it's
right,
and you're just like, what happened? And you never identify with any real character. I think you're supposed to with David Thewlis's, but he's kind of this outside observer.
He's very much a Victorian protagonist.
Yeah,
he's the guy who just wrote it all down.
And you're just kind of like that. There's no real emotion.
It's not very cinematic.
No, and on top of it, like this is one of his first roles, and he's kind of a theatrical actor. And when you're having him kind of just observe, sure, his performance is nice. Like, I mean, because he's a good actor, but at the same point, it's not really doing anything to draw the viewer into the film. Like, why do I care that this ridiculous guy painted white is somebody we should be care about, or his drug addicted or whatever is going on with Val Kilmer, who is shirtless.
You mean the character, right?
Like the character. Like you don't really identify with any of these. Like Val Kilmer went from being like this brilliant scientist to a loony been in essentially, I don't know, 3 scenes. Like it
Yeah.
was. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and you're just kind of like you don't really understand why you should care about any of these people.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. And it's funny because he's introduced Thulis's character as essentially like a negotiator, like not really an
Something like
ambassador,
that.
but
Yeah.
some kind of diplomatic role for the UN. And he's flying somewhere to stop a war or something. And so you'd think, okay, maybe not the most exciting Beastman movie ever, but we could have philosophical debate between Brando and Thulis's characters.
I would honestly, if you set it up as like a courtroom drama kind of thing where you're having like debate or something, I think it would kind of work.
Okay.
Like, I mean, it would be completely different than the actual book, but I think you could get into that kind of idea of what is man, what
12
is
Angry Beastmen.
yeah, something like that. But like, and if you have a character like Thulis who's supposed to be like some sort of moderator, like yeah, but at the same point, like for some reason they want him on the island, and that's never really explained.
No.
Or why what value he would bring.
Well, it's literally not explained because near the end of the movie, I love that. Okay, we're jumping all over, but that's the show. When Firuza Balk sends him off to get the serum, he just disappears. He just wanders around, and she finds him like later, and it's like, did you get that serum at all?
Yeah.
But he goes to the lab and he sees that there's samples that have been taken from him, and we never get any explanation as to what that's supposed to be.
No.
And my sort of headcanon on that is, they set up very clearly man is bad, man is the real animal, with this opening of the two guys trying to kill each other on the raft, and then the very ham-handed like news footage or whatever thing at the end. So in the middle you'd think, okay, so it's not Prendick, that's the guy in the book, Douglas, Thulis's character, he's going to represent the best instincts of man to like make peace and stuff like that. Never exists in the movie.
At no point,
except for the end where he uses his negotiation tactics to turn the animals against each other, which is a nice twist.
It's a
and
nice
would
twist,
maybe fit into their theme, but is never built upon in the rest of the film.
But at the same point, when you're setting up the theme that like man is the real monster, and then you end the movie with man turning the pure angelic beasts against one another, it's like, doesn't that just reinforce the theme that men are awful and really?
And it's almost, if it had just been creature feature for 90 minutes. It would be less disappointing than having these little tatters of, might have been a good idea, but nope, blown through it. This has been, as you mentioned, adapted many times. It's been adapted 7 times to film, including this one, and that includes the 2 French and German silent version before the pre-Hays Code version called Island of Lost Souls, starring Charles Laughton and Bela Lugosi. Which, have you seen that?
I have, but it's been years.
Well,
it's one of those ones like every time Criterion has a sale, I'm like, I really should buy that.
Yeah. And as like you kind of pointed out before, doesn't really capture anything. It's just a jungle pick, basically, from the 30s.
I haven't seen the 77 version, which I've always wanted to.
I haven't either. I tried to watch it for this, and I love Michael York.
Yeah.
And I like Burt Lancaster, too.
I've heard it's kind of loony. Like, it just goes...
Yeah, and it takes a while to get going, too.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, it's the 70s.
Right. And plus they're not going to get that crazy. So, like, the Beastmen, it's just like Planet of the Apes rejects, basically. Nothing really that fantastic there. So it wasn't until this guy, who we should probably start talking about.
We should.
Richard Stanley came on and was like, this is a real thing. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
This story deserves to be told in the way that I want to tell it, with human-animal hybrid orgies and drugs and all this other stuff. Richard Stanley's kind of a weird guy.
He is, but he's fascinating.
He is fascinating. The poet shirt and cowboy hat
dictionary
tells you. Oh yeah, sure. It tells you everything you know. He's a South African filmmaker, and he kind of burst onto the scene insofar as you can in a real small indie sort of market with his initial first film, Hardwire.
Yes, which is
Hardware. Excuse me.
Yeah, Hardware, which is a phenomenal film.
It's all right.
Oh no, it's so good. It's so good.
It's good in that, like, well, you said Meet the Feebles before. It's good in that early, like Peter Jackson-y sort of. Yeah, I don't care too much about the plot or what's going on.
I would argue like it's probably the sleaziest movie ever made. Like, it's so creepy and how, especially like how it's presented, but it also has this kind of punk rock vibe to it too. Have you
seen Dust Devil?
I have seen Dust Devil, which I also love.
You mentioned Sleaze.
Yeah.
That's there too.
Yeah, Dust Devil is a movie like I am blown away that was released in theaters. Like, I don't know how.
Well, thank the Weinsteins.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of how Hardware got out too. Dust Devil it's hard to track down. If you get a chance to watch it, like it's a trip. Like it's a movie that's throwing a lot at you. I am sure there is a ton I am not picking up.
Well, and also, and it's steeped in the culture of South Africa, not just the country, but the region of South Africa.
Yeah,
the whole thing is shot in Namibia and has all to do with African like witch doctors and spirits and things.
Yeah,
like that.
and like these spirit guides and demons and all this kind of stuff. And it's like visually, both the movies I think are really impressive, especially for like their budget and stuff.
Oh yeah, I gotta say that about hardware, that's for sure. Like he was a big lover of Stanley of stop motion and Ray Harryhausen and stuff like that, and that comes through. Like the creature in hardware is awesome.
Yeah, it's great, and yeah, it's an impressive movie if you can find it. Like it's a hard movie for me to go like you're gonna like this. Like it's more like you just need to go experience and see like, hey, this kind of movie was actually made and released on like 1,000 screens. Like that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, this is a New Line movie. Remember when you used to see New Line and go, "Oh, great! I can't wait!"
Super awesome.
Was this the beginning of the end for New Line?
Probably.
Have we talked about the plot? Do you want to summarize the story briefly? I mean, I don't know who
I don't know if there's a ton of plot to it. Like it's as we said, like
100 pages, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, a man is essentially lost at sea. He's picked up by this boat. He's offered some lodging on this remote island, and he knows of the doctor that Moreau is a well-known geneticist, and scientist, and fairly well respected. At least is how it's pitched.
Yeah,
and that he can find lodging here, and eventually another ship will be coming by that could pick him up. And when he gets there, he discovers that Moreau is performing these genetic experiments on animals, essentially crossing their genes with humans to create these kind of animal-human hybrids, and trying to build a pure civilization on the island. And then, of course, things go bad.
Yeah. And of course, like I kind of mentioned before, I still don't know what his goal was or why it was turning beasts into men. It's that idea of man as the real monster. And I don't know if his idea was that, because there's that short brief exchange at the dinner table about, it's just kind of religious crap that was thrown in by a screenwriter probably, but if man is really evil and beasts, the noble sort of savage beast, if we could give them human faculties, then they would be the best humans. I don't know if it's that, or if it's good to be a man or an animal, because later on the animals are like, hey, we're not men, we're animals.
Yeah.
But then they're running around with machine guns and they're like, we're men. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, what's the real point here?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this was a lot of that was designed by committee, like, and no one really going like, well, if the concept is that animals are pure, aren't you tainting them the moment you add human DNA
right?
to
Yeah,
them?
and that is a very religious sort of theme there.
Yeah, like, so why are we doing like it? Just everything is kind of muddled, and it all has like it's the problem with the actual themes and to a degree the plot is like the moment you really start thinking about it, it has a million of questions that are not good. Like none of it that helps support the movie.
Right? They're not.
Just
yeah.
go, oh God, where are we going?
Yeah.
Why is this the direction that we pick?
There's a lot of nits to pick.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I feel like a 10th grade kid who paid attention in English class could sort of put together the themes of, man is fallen or tainted or whatever. And so we're sort of spreading that to the animals and stuff like that. And like you said, maybe it's committee, maybe it's the different screenwriters that are all involved, which we'll talk about in a second, that just leave this thing like, well, I can see the general shape of how the puzzle should be, but the pieces are everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could make a really interesting movie about abuse through it. Like, I think you could really do something cool with that.
Somebody got Brando's script from like '94, so it was like in the early sort of drafts of it, and it was on eBay, and it's got his handwritten notes on it. And as you can imagine, for a Brando of the time, a lot of it's gobbledygook. But his focus seemed to be like he thought that the real theme of the movie was a condemnation of toxic masculinity in society.
And I think that's probably there. Like, I think that's there and present in the book. Like, I don't think that was when Wells wrote it, but I think it
No, he was like, masculinity, thumbs up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that translates well now, though. Like, it could be, like, the humans could be all male. You could make it like that and make it this kind of thing where they are constantly abusing this society, this serfdom almost. Mm-hmm. And then from there, as a rebel uprising to like you can make that movie, and I think it would be kind of cool. Like if you do it well and you have this animal uprising kind of thing, I think it could be really neat. But Moreau or Island of Doctor Moreau doesn't really seem to have. The problem is it has about 8 different directions it could go, and it decides to go in all 8.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's not, you can't blame that on Richard Stanley because he didn't direct the movie.
No, he was there like a week.
I know, and this is this crazy story that we're talking about, of course. He was hired to make the movie on the strength of his previous work. And I think it's getting guys like Val Kilmer and Brando that really killed him. I think they pushed for that to give it money and legitimacy. But if this had been like a less than $10 million picture, it might have turned out fine. But it became, as movies do, and at the time, $35 million was $80 million.
Oh, I think it's even bigger than that.
Yeah, so this was a big deal. And it's funny because he's still around. He's 50, so that means like he was 30 or 31. He was so young back then.
He was very young. I mean, he seems... I mean, he's a fascinating guy. I'm sure like his pitch blew people away. Like,
and
I can't imagine. Yeah. I mean, he has all the drawings and the documentary shows all this kind of stuff, and you're like, wow. Like, I mean, he speaks with such passion and such knowledge, and I mean, the idea, like, I mean, he's also related, what was his great grandfather or whatever it was?
The Stanley, the Henry Morton Stanley.
Yeah,
the
and
actual...
like this, I'm sure he's pitching stuff like the idea of going into the jungle and into the savages and all this kind of thing and finding humanity in these people. Like, I mean, he speaks with like this such conviction. Like, I'm sure people were like, wow, like this is great. I mean, and they talk in the documentary is he did the same pitch to Brando. Right. Because when Brando came in, like that's when his job was on the line. Like, because now we have a real movie. Like, instead of
and
this
I think the studio thought, oh, Brando's going to chew this guy up. Yeah. So we kind of want to get rid of him and send him to Brando. Yeah. But he really hit it off with Brando. Yep. And I think a lot of it was because, like you mentioned before, Henry Morton Stanley, the whole, Dr. Livingston, I presume, guy, the character in Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad,
is based
Kurtz was based on that guy. And Brando's headspace was still there, so they kind of got together over that. Yeah. Fun fact, 1896, Dr. Moreau comes out. 1897, Heart of Darkness came out. Wells and Conrad were friends, and Wells actually got real mad and had a sort of breakup with Conrad after that because he accused Conrad of stealing ideas from his book for Heart of Darkness. Yeah, so he's a guy, he's a visionist, he's a visionary, he's a creative guy, you can tell. All right, put a clapper in his hand and see how he does. Mm-hmm. And it seems like he maybe didn't have the, I don't know.
Time management skills?
Time management skills for sure. Or possibly the disposition to direct a film, especially on an island off of Australia, Queensland, Australia, in the middle of nowhere. And it's ironic they brought John Frankenheimer in, who at this point had already replaced like 2 other directors on different films. So he's like the pinch hitter guy. Totally opposite personality on the spectrum of a Richard Stanley. Like tell this guy, go get over there, do this. No nonsense.
Very old school, no nonsense. Yeah. I am the director. I am in charge. Right. You are all ants, kind of thing. Right. And like, yeah, I mean, I think if Stanley, like, he's like, as big as his personality is, it never seemed like he was good at directing people on how to meet that vision. And I think that was probably what ultimately killed him. Is you have 2 people in Brando and Kilmer who basically took over the set and were also at war with one another. Like, they hated each other's guts, and it became like this petty feud between the 2 of them because they're like, who cares if it's the studio's money? Like, we got paid. We don't care about anybody else. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, they are basically, it's implied that they are trying to sink the film, basically.
Yeah, and I think Kilmer has come out recently talking about like his behavior during like this time, not even just during this movie, is like something feels pretty bad about. Like he was not in a good place. No.
But he was Batman.
Yeah.
So he could do anything he wanted to do.
He was Iceman, and he was
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and the story's in Lost Soul, the documentary, like we said, but after he got fired, he basically sort of went on a walkabout, to use the local parlance, and ended up on a farm,
who knows
north.
Where?
Yeah, who knows where, but like north on the coastline or something. And long story short, after Frankenheimer was on the film, Frankenheimer's looking for more extras, and they got local like hippies that were living in the woods, basically.
Yep.
And through total chance, like one night, some of these hippies were in the woods, and Richard Stanley's like, "What's going on?" And he goes and meets these guys, and they're like, "Oh, we're on this movie. It's the Island of Doctor Moreau." And so, long story longer, they actually managed to sneak him onto the set in a dog mask,
Yep.
and he becomes an extra,
Yeah.
a beast in the movie he was originally
so
directing.
he's actually in the movie.
Yes. and which is like great story if it ends there, right? But it's a legend. No, it's all real. If you watch this documentary, he's got the mask that he wore, and you can see stills from the production of a guy wearing that mask, and you go, could be anybody. But there's one close up, and I looked for this. There's a crazy ring on the guy's hand. That is totally a Richard Stanley ring.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's all true.
Well, and that kind of stuff is so crazy. Like when you hear the story of like he climbed up a tree and wouldn't come down, you're like,
Which is disputed.
Maybe it's true.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
could be.
know.
Yeah.
Like he snuck back on set and hid in a dog head like for evidently a couple weeks. So maybe he did climb a tree. I don't know what's
Possible.
going on.
Yeah. Well, we're doing what we said we weren't going to do. Talking about Lost Soul. Let's talk about the cast. Of course, Bruce Willis and James Woods were originally up for the roles of, what's his name? Douglas, that's it, and Montgomery, respectively. Those roles eventually went to the werewolf guy from Harry Potter, David Thewlis.
Well,
And-
Kilmer was supposed to be in that role.
Yes.
And then showed up and decided, no, I'm going to play this other role.
Yeah,
which
and
is why they had to recast
Right.
twice.
Yeah, he was originally the lead. And the story goes that this is a perfect storm, and there was actually a literal storm hurricane on the set, but this is a perfect storm of things going wrong in people's lives because Kilmer basically was getting divorced to Joanne Whaley at the time.
Yep.
Actually, Bruce Willis pulled out because he was getting divorced from Demi Moore, and so he just did not want to. I mean, he was a tyrant of the ego persuasion, but he also just, understandably did not want to do this movie in the middle of nowhere. And so Stanley...
Well, and it would be a long shoot.
It's a long shoot,
Long
yeah.
shoot in the middle of nowhere that they essentially built everything there.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everyone's going like, oh, God, we're going to be crapping in pots and pans for
Right.
3 months.
And Stanley convinced him to sort of swap roles with the other part to give him sort of less screen time. So he became Montgomery, and then, of course, as you mentioned, Rob Morrow was going to play the original role of Douglas. Theory for you, Rob Morrow, kind of the 80s Tom Cavanaugh. Tom Cavanaugh, kind of the 90s Zachary Levi. Zachary Levi, the 2000s blank.
Oh, I don't know.
Any one of the guys on Big Bang Theory? I don't know.
Probably.
But, of course, Rob Morrow was only on it for a couple of days, and... knew enough to know that things were heading south.
I love the fact that like his story,
Called his lawyer.
Yeah, his story is like 2 hours, or his time there is like 2 days long, and is literally like, I got there, it's awful. I essentially called my lawyer and agent and cried to get off the movie.
I gotta get out of here. Yeah.
Like, this is crazy. Get me away.
Yeah. And he made the right choice, it looks like, there, because he got out pretty clean.
He seemed pretty confident.
Pretty clean
that
from this thing. I think it was a good idea to switch switch roles, because to have Val Kilmer, who is one of the highlights of this film, I think, deliver this loopy performance. I don't know what he was going through, what he was doing, but it's fun to watch.
Yes.
To have him play the straight,
Oh, it would be super
That's
boring.
the David Thewlis role. Just
Yeah,
have
it,
this guy...
it works better as like a serious British actor. Like that's...
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. And like one of the... so the script was written by Richard Stanley originally, then of course rewritten. A guy named, I think Ron Hutchinson came in and rewrote it when Frankenheimer came on. He collaborated a lot with Frankenheimer. And originally, Michael Herr did a pass on the script, and he is a guy that worked on Apocalypse Now. And so, in my mind, again, crazy theory, but I feel like Montgomery became this character that was very similar to like the Dennis Hopper character in Apocalypse Now.
I think that's...
This guy who's like flitting around, the crazy Kurtz-like character.
Yeah, has been here so long that he's been pulled in by the whole thing.
Yeah,
but
and it's a good look.
And I think it would work better if they had set it up the entire movie kind of like that,
Right.
instead of it just being like one scene he's normal and the next scene he's Dennis Hopper.
Right, he's on drugs and he's running around. Yeah, yeah. I really like the part though where he throws the squeak toy to the dog boy or whatever, and he's like, "There you go, dog boy, take that." Brando. I mean, how do you get around Brando? He's huge, but he literally is huge, and it was a big deal that he came onto this film, and everybody on the film, even down to John Frankenheimer, essentially did this dog because they wanted to work with Brando.
Yeah,
and the Brando,
and I understand it. Like,
oh yeah, but the Brando they got is not.
Well, it's late. It's late Brando.
It is late Brando, and this. I didn't look back in research for before this, but this is definitely what sort of solidified or cemented the idea of Crazy Brando going forward.
Oh yeah, I mean South Park essentially has made a mint off of this Brando.
Yeah,
like that's, and I think this is what, unfortunately, is what a lot of people think of Brando. Like when they, at least of our generation and probably later, is that he was kind of nuts. And he may not have been. Like, who knows? Like, you don't know enough about it. He was going through his own trauma where his daughter died.
Yeah, she committed suicide.
And he probably was clearly in a I don't give a shit mode.
Oh, yeah. There's a great quote in the documentary where somebody says that he's showing the quote, legendary contempt for what he does.
Yep.
Which is just like, wow. I don't know.
I don't know if you listen to the WTF podcast at all. Ron Perlman was on it, who is a bit player in this.
He is a bit player.
In there, which is a great episode. Those two talk quite a bit about this movie too, and he talks about like his love of Brando and his chance to work with Brando and how he was introduced to Brando on like the first day of shooting. Is he is playing this blind kind of goat priest
man
thing. And he literally had to wear contacts that made him blind, so he couldn't hit his marks, and he had to like memorize where he's stepping, and he kept banging into Brando, and so like his introduction to Brando is like, you know, oh my God, sir, I respect you so much, you're such an idol of mine, and Brando's like, fuck off, stop hitting me, like,
right?
Learn your
hooves
stuff.
off my feet,
and and Perlman's like, I was crushed, like I literally was crushed by my idol. Going, you suck at this job.
Right, yeah. Also having to be on the production for 4.5 months after you were scheduled for maybe 5 weeks. The entire thing was scheduled, and the schedule's always flexible, I'm sure, but it went from 6 weeks to 6 months.
Yeah.
Which is insane when you're in the jungle in Australia. Yeah, it's too bad. You have to think, I was trying to think, like, isn't Don Juan DeMarco was like 93, 94?
Probably around there.
And that was like pretty manageable Brando, but yeah, that's not the Brando people were getting. And I think that because Frankenheimer wanted to work with him so bad, we never found out what Stanley would have done with him really as an actor and director relationship. But I think he let him get away with a lot of stuff.
Oh, I think he let him get away with anything.
This is the part now in the production where he's dressing up like the Pope and he's putting an ice bucket on his head.
Yeah,
and he's like,
he's covering himself in white paint so his stand-in can be in it.
Yeah, right.
He completely starts changing people's roles.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of the little person's name.
We should definitely talk about the little person. His name was Nelson something or other. Nelson de la Rosa.
Okay. Yeah, he essentially creates a part for him.
Yeah. And this is the infamous Mini-Me part, basically.
Yep.
Which I have to say, and we can talk about the Stan Winston stuff later, but his costume or his look was really good because he doesn't look like that. I mean, he looks fairly normal, this little small guy, but they have this really weird look. And in the book, the sloth creature, which I guess he's supposed to be, is described as looking like a flayed child, and it's like, well, you guys pulled that off.
Yeah, I mean, he's got kind of like a fetus-y kind of look,
right? Just
kind of
slightly gooey.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brando just fell in love with this guy.
Yeah. I mean, he seemed like in the documentary they talk about like he's a ladies' man and like all this stuff.
Well,
like, and he's like super popular. I think he's from Indonesia,
Dominican Republic,
and like that he's just super popular there, and like just evidently is like a really cool guy. And Brando is just fascinated by him.
Yeah. So let's give him more lines. Let's give him a bigger part. Sadly, that part came from Marco Hofschneider's character of M. Ling, who was really set out to be the... I've heard this. I don't know if it really works or reflects at all, but there's supposed to be a lot of the Tempest in this, or at least in its concept.
Okay.
You got this guy with power. He lives on an island. He's got a daughter. There's a shipwreck. And then so M. Ling's character is supposed to be the young... He's a dog boy, but sort of ingenue, sort of innocent, who sees all this happen. And that's what Marco signed on for, all cut to shit.
Yeah.
Lines are going to the Nelson. Val Kilmer is like, why is this guy so... Apparently there's a confrontation between them where he's like, hey, I saw that movie you're in, pretty good. He's like, oh, thanks. He's like, if it comes down to you and me, it's going to be me. And this young guy's like, what the fuck? What did I do? It's his part in the documentary is great because he's the guy who's just like, look at this.
Yeah, he got
totally screwed.
Steamrolled.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you feel for the guy so much. Like, he was so excited. Like, this was his first big role.
Yeah.
And it's just gone. Like he is the summation of like what happens when you have big Hollywood stars that can do whatever they want.
He got ground to dust.
Yeah. And they didn't think twice about it.
No, not at all. We should talk about some of the other people in the film. There's a guy named Peter Elliott. He plays Assassimon, a ape-type guy. He's the other five-fingered man, who apparently had a big subplot that got cut because he's got a baseball bat. And I heard that at one point there was some sort of subplot where they were like teaching them to play baseball in the woods.
Sure.
That's all gone. But he's a famous sort of animal performer. And I didn't mean to do 2 jungle movies in a row on the show, but we talked about Congo on the last show, and he didn't perform in Congo, but he was one of the ape trainers, training people to act more animal-like. And I have to say, that's one of the highlights of the film. I
think in general,
everybody acts real weird, and
I think it all that kind of stuff works. The effects are really good. They stand up pretty well. I mean, it's a lot of practical effects, which is why I think
there's
holds
very
up so
little.
well.
In fact, when there is CGI, it stands out. Not because it's bad necessarily. I mean, it's mid-90s CGI, but because it's so jarring. Suddenly, there's a bunch of little monkey rats, and you're like, "Wait, what's this?" You couldn't have built 1 or 2 monkey rat puppets. You know,
I mean, Stan Winston evidently, clearly still brought his A game, even though a lot of other people weren't.
Oh my god!
But yeah, I mean, I think in general, like all that, like that creature effects and those people and those extras clearly were giving their all and doing the best they can in probably horrible conditions. Like, I can't imagine what it would be like to be covered in all of that plaster,
waiting for hours for Brando to come out of his trailer,
humidity and heat. And, oh my god! Like
that scene where, and this might that real world situation might have contributed to this, but the scene where Fairuza Balk brings him to the village. And there's also a weird backstory that we never get about this. There's a crashed plane in the sort of animal village, and he walks in and he's covering his mouth because the stink is apparently so bad. And there's all these just wretched creatures walking around. Like, that was one of the cool parts of the movie to me. It's like, oh, this could have been the whole thing. And the studio probably would have balked because it would have been, like you said, beautiful in a gross way.
Very grotesque.
Yeah, they wouldn't have gone for that. But yeah, that's that part where he comes in. He's like, take me to Dr. Zaius, that sort of scene. Fairuza Balk, we can talk about her. This is the same year as The Craft, which is a real big thing for her. I know that she was really distraught or distressed when Stanley got fired because I think that she really found like a connection with him.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you can tell from the documentary, like she is clearly someone that is a fan and probably still a friend with Stanley in some respects. Like, I mean, her story is essentially like she got in a cab and drove to Sydney, which is
right.
I don't know,
which
20 hours away.
Very far away from where they were. Yeah.
It's and just like she's young, but like she's just breaking out.
Yeah. And, wanted to walk off the film.
Yep.
And was, basically at the behest of her career was persuaded to stay. But she did okay.
Yeah, I think she's fine. I mean, they talk about like there was going to be a bigger kind of romantic subplot with her that gets cut, which also would have just been kind of weird.
Right. But in every adaptation of this that they've done, they've always added a subplot with a love interest, which doesn't exist in the book.
I don't know why. I mean,
it's a Hollywood thing.
That feels like a Hollywood thing where like we have to have a romantic interest in here for the women. I don't know. I think that's really what these suits think, like, oh, that'll get the women in to watch this movie is we'll have a little bit of a romance, and that's what they'll like about
with a cat lady.
Yeah, we'll have a guy have sex with a half cat, like that'll bring him in,
and then she'll give birth to a kitten, which was apparently something that was pitched for the '77 version. Barbara Carrera would give birth to a kitten at the end.
Cat people was big back then.
Well, it was, and Michael York was like, I'm not doing that. So you guys can do what you want. I'm not doing that. A guy named Daniel Rigney, who was a young actor, played the Hyena Swine, who's sort of again, muddled themes, but kind of the villain, but also really a big victim in this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the disappointing thing for me. Like, they didn't know what to do with him, so you never really...
Are we rooting for him? Are we?
Yeah,
do we want him to...
he should have been he should have been portrayed as the victim.
Yeah.
And made his story a tragedy, and instead... they
he just turns into an asshole.
Yeah, and he's just brutal. He's as bad as anything else.
Yeah.
And so it just muddles. Again, it's another problem where it just muddles what the theme is, and you're not really sure what you're supposed to do or who you're supposed to root for.
Yeah. That actor died soon after the movie came out in 1997 from a brain hemorrhage, unfortunately.
Too bad.
A couple more players on the film. Tamura Morrison plays Azazello, one of the valets, I believe, and he is Jango Fett. He's the guy that played Jango Fett in the Star Wars prequels. Also, another Star Wars actor who's in this, I think. His name is William Hootkins, and this guy is sort of like the Zelig of like late 70s, early 80s sci-fi, because he played Porkins in Star Wars. He played Eckhart in Batman. He's a Stanley guy. He was in all of Stanley's movies.
He's in Hardware, yeah.
Yeah, he's in Dust Devil too. And he played Munson in Flash Gordon. Supposedly, he's in the credits. He's even in the opening credits as Kirill. I can't find him in the movie.
Yeah, I would have no
idea. There's no character named Kirill in the movie. Now, there is one in Stanley's script, and so I wonder if this is a situation where all the contracts were signed, all the agents and the negotiations were made, and this guy was billed for this thing, then was totally cut. Or all of the scenes were dropped, and so he's just still in the credits.
That must be something.
Yeah. But he's the top men guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay, yeah.
We have top men on this, yeah. So anyway, that worked out for him, I guess. And then Mark Dacascos is in this as well. He is he plays the Panther guy who gets killed very early on.
Yep.
And he's a stunt actor. He's probably best known as the Iron Chef guy. He's the chairman of Iron Chef. It was shot, like we said, in Cairns, or Cairns, as they say, in Australia, and it went 6 months, and it was apparently, it was a nightmare all the way through. And you have to imagine that they're not literally on an island in the middle of nowhere. They did pick an island to shoot the exterior type shots for, but just deep in the middle of the jungle, and you've got people who, in the documentary, there's a woman who plays the Sow Lady, I think, and she talks about how, it's clear that she's just a character actor, day player, performer.
Extra for the most part.
And she got hired to do this thing for 4 weeks, and it turned into 6 months. And her story, she's the only one they talk to. There have to be 100 people like her. And they talk about how the whole thing became this crazy, like, apocalyptic sort of party where they're all just partying.
Why would they
people
not?
are screwing each other, and they're doing drugs, and they're all just waiting for something to happen. Like, it's... Okay. Welcome to Lost Souls, the podcast, I guess. But that's why it's such a great story, because it just reflects... do you think, is it like a Charlie Kaufman-esque kind of thing where it's like they're trying to make this movie and they end up creating like this situation that is basically what they're trying to film?
Yeah, I think to a degree. Like, the Lost Souls gets compared a lot to Lost in La Mancha a lot, but like that is a movie that is literally over the course of like a week before that movie is just shut down, where they realize this is bad, we need to stop. Mm-hmm. And at no point it didn't seem really like anyone went, we need to stop. Like this is spiraling out of control. And instead they're like, well, let's just kind of see how far it goes. Yeah. And
you have to, there's that sort of, that brinksmanship is really strange. You also have to think that there's probably studio pressure. We've dropped $40 million or whatever into this.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure they're like, we've got Brando. We've got to, he's got what, 3 movies left in him? Like we got to
We're New Line, goddammit. We make these movies. Whereas, who knows where Terry Gilliam's getting his money from? It's just, nobody's pressuring him. Fun fact, number 2, he has completed principal photography on The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, so it will come out now.
Yes, it will.
Jonathan Pryce is in it, Adam Driver, and Olga Kurlenko, I think. So
I hope it's good.
Unless the editing bay burns down, this is going to really exist. We've been bagging on this thing. You want to talk about some of the things you really liked from the film?
There's not a ton. Like this, it's not like it's not a bad movie. It's just a frustrating movie.
That's why I wanted to talk about it on the show, because that's the real tragic part about it.
Yeah, like I think there's so much potential in it. I like the source material. There's some decent casting. There's some good performances. The effects are very good. It's just, it is story is bad. Yeah. Like and you can just see how many everything is going all over the place. Like, as much as there's probably 3 or 4 people credited with the script, it's probably 20. Like it feels like rewrite hell. And this is the kind of movie that seems complicated enough. Like, you needed that down before you went out into production.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they did. And I think they just were rewriting. And like, you literally have scenes missing that are integral to the plot of the story.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Like, that's a big, big problem.
Yeah.
And
highlights. We're talking highlights.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, like, seriously, like, the highlights is the effects. Like, I think all the people in the creature outfits is super cool.
Yeah.
I think it does. I think the scene where they turn on Brando is actually good. Like, I think that actually works pretty well.
I don't know which version you saw, but there's an extended sort of version of that scene in the director's cut that's a lot more graphic.
Yeah, and I think I believe that's what's on the Blu-ray is just the director's cut.
Yeah, where he gets his hand torn off.
Yeah, and it's like
what does Richard Stanley have against hands? Hands and fingers really take it in his films.
But yeah, I think that scene works really well as like an actual moment of horror.
Yeah.
Which is what this kind of story needs, especially to fuel like the rage of these animals.
Yeah. And that scene is another. Maybe none of the highlights can go untinged by lowlights, because that scene is another thing that could have been really great and just isn't. Where they break into his house. Moreau's house, and he comes in and he tries to welcome them like, "Oh, my children, you're going to come over." But
it feels like a pack hunt, like, which is what I really like about it. Like, they're kind of slowly moving around him. Like, that is something.
And it's that thing where the animal starts to realize that, I could, bite you and get away with it.
Yeah, you're just a man.
Yeah.
Like, and I think
and I know that he could have done this, but he doesn't bother to. Brando is you see him trying to be like, "Oh, everything's fine," but also out of the corner of his eye being like, I don't think that we're fine here.
Yeah,
Things
I need
are
to
not
be
working
prepared.
out.
Yeah, and I think like that scene, I think is one of the few that I think works really well in what it was aiming to do. Like, it was to build tension.
Well, you can tell what they were trying to do.
Yes, and to me, like, that is easily my favorite scene in the movie.
It's too bad too, and I noticed this a lot of Brando's scenes, and it might be because he is Brando and didn't want to work a lot, but almost all of his scenes are in a long take from the master. Mm-hmm. And you get that in that scene as well. That's a scene where we could use a lot of inserts where there is one where he looks side eye he sees blood dripping down from the hyena, and he realizes something's wrong.
And I think he looks at like his gun or something in the drawer.
But otherwise it's all just Brando walks in, so my children. And the scene just goes on and on and on. The one where he's got the ice bucket on his head is just one long take. And I love long takes, but it's just clear that he didn't want to do anything else.
No, he wanted
so
to
they
get
just
in
shot
and get
that.
out.
Yeah. But where was his stand-in? They could have done stuff with his stand-in if he didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
You weren't there. Thank God. I really liked, and again, you see this in the documentary, but you see the concept art done by Graham Humphreys, who's a guy that worked with Stanley on his films before. He's another one of those guys that does posters and VHS tape covers. So he might have influenced you to watch movies when you were young. And they're just fascinating, beautiful art.
Yeah.
That shows a film that costs way more than this one actually ended up doing, but would have been great. And there's one where it just struck me, like, where he's got Moreau as this very almost holy deity sort of figure riding on a horse, and he's got like a halo around his head, and he's got like this hat and like this beard, and he's in a suit. And I was like, he said that he was basing it like on Timothy Leary and John Lilly, the guy who communicated with dolphins or whatever. Okay. But in my mind, it's like, you didn't know that you were looking for Alejandro Jodorowsky to play this role. Yeah. Because it just looks like El Topo, just totally. And he's a big fan of Jodorowsky, of course.
Oh, of course he is.
Is it just called Jodorowsky's Dune, that documentary about Dune? Yeah, he's one of the speakers in that. So that's like, oh, man, if only somebody would have given you 80%, 60% of the money that you had to make that movie instead of what you ended up making.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stanley wanted to make like this cool little creature-based art film, which is what he makes. Like, that is the hardware for all of what it is an art film. Yeah. It's a hardcore genre art film, and Dust Devil is this weird metaphysical kind of art film as well. And like, I think that's the same thing he wanted to do here, and instead the studio went, no, we want to make a Hollywood blockbuster. And that is
Dust Devil is like the best. It's like a 90-minute Duran Duran video they never made.
Yeah.
And I say that totally positively.
And yeah, I mean, like you have these two absolutely conflicting styles, and that's disappointing. And like, there's so much potential in what, like, all those images that they're showing, and you're listening to Stanley talk about it. You're like, God, I want to see that movie.
You keep saying Stan Lee, and I think of like Stanley. Throw these beast men there. Val Kilmer just no matter how much of an asshole he was, like, is a total highlight for me. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of over the top performances, and he gives an over the top performance.
Yeah,
I honestly would have liked it cranked up maybe to like 12 from 11.
Oh, he could have gone bigger. Yeah.
Like, I think it would have worked more if he did go bigger.
And it really makes me regret him sort of disappearing. And I hope that Top Gun 2 starts a renaissance for him, so we can get some like Val Kilmer back.
I mean, I am a fan of a fully engaged Val Kilmer. Like, when he is into a role, he's really good. He's really good,
and not even when he's being big necessarily. Like Spartan is great because in Spartan he's just this straight down the line, like real serious operative or whatever, and yet you get that intensity and like you just wanna. He's one of those charismatic Hollywood heroes that you just want to be on his side. Well, even when he's an asshole in this film and he's pointing guns at people's head, at the end when he starts doing his Brando impression and he's like overseeing the Beastman rave.
That's so good.
That
scene is good.
You feel kind of bad for it. Suddenly he becomes the victim as well. And then he gets blown away. He's like, I want to go to dog heaven. Blow him away. Poor guy.
I forgot about that. That one is good. I like that. Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys that he plays an asshole really well. He can do a very controlled performance. Like, I think Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is one where he's very controlled, but he's so good at
literally being flamboyant.
Yeah. It's like he's someone that I don't know if gets enough credit for how good of an actor he is when he wants to be, but he is a star. Like, he has a commanding presence about him, and it like. The movie doesn't know how to use him very well. He's certainly in smaller bits, and when he's there and actually giving a crap or at least giving a performance, like, it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, like, if you're gonna make this the Hollywood blockbuster, you need some fun in there. And they're like, he's the only one that seems to think part of this is fun. Everyone else is taking this deadly seriously.
I can't confirm this, but I believe that it was not originally meant to come out in August.
Probably not.
Yeah, because it is not a summer blockbuster at all. And so that, I think it really suffered for that part of it. I'm trying to think of some of the other films that Kilmer's been in. I mean, there are a lot. And like, what sort of got his ship off the guiding star?
I don't know.
He seemed to accept a lot of, like, why would he really accept this? He doesn't have any connection to the material.
No.
He doesn't.
Oh, money. Like, that's
money
they
for
must,
sure.
I think that's the only thing is they must have thrown.
But he was, this is right after Batman Forever. Like, he literally could have done anything, and yeah, I mean, New Line must have really coughed it up to get him.
I mean, it very well could have been wanting to work with Brando too.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, and then
which quickly turned to
Rancor. Which realized like, I hate your guts.
Yeah,
like, and yeah,
if it comes down to you and me, Brando, it's gonna be me.
And that's really seems to be like probably the only decision is you're going to give you a lot of money. You're going to go stay in some tropical paradise,
right?
And you don't really have to do anything. And I mean, and I'm sure part of it too is like he's going through this bad divorce. I want to get the hell out of Dodge,
right?
And go do whatever the hell I want to do,
right? It's no Thunderheart, I'll tell you that much.
No, I
yeah. Well, it's clear that this did not turn out very good, but why do you think that critics hated it so much?
I mean, it's a mess. Like, it's a muddled mess.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that critics detest. Like,
yeah.
they can tolerate a movie they don't like if it's at least cleanly told, but when it starts, when you watch enough movies, these kinds of movies stand out as like, oh my God, you're wasting my time. Like,
yeah.
You clearly didn't put in the effort to tell a coherent story or coherent themes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really irks critics.
It's an incomplete.
Yeah.
More than enough.
Yeah.
And even with Frankenheimer, who's made some good movies, there are like jarring scene transitions, which is just an effect of the editing where it's like, all right, we've reached whatever the point of that scene was, and then bam, we're into something else. And there's Jeeps or something like that.
Yep.
And, yeah, okay, I can see that. I also think it's another one of those things where critics have to kind of get, blow off steam sometimes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You've been...
And I think genre is a very good place for them to do that, especially
absolutely.
in the 90s when this is before the rise of like the internet film critic, which loves genre films in general.
Yeah.
Like this is when genre is where, unless it is this high-minded, serious film, like it's garbage, or
Right.
T2 or something.
Yeah,
like,
Pauline
something
Kael's
that
not
is-
going for this
Yeah,
one.
something that is so big and so different and so new. Like if it's not that, then they are ready. They are ready and willing to tear it to pieces.
Yeah. Well, some of the critics did tear it to pieces. For Pick of the Patch, let's look at some of the words from critics at the time. So this guy, I don't know this guy, a guy named Brandon Jadell from Critics Incorporated, which is clearly a huge, important thing, said the most exciting characters are killed off too early, and what we're left with is a Satan's Sesame Street. It's a good line.
That is a good line.
But he's absolutely right. The leopard panther guy who you think is going to be some kind of like anti-hero sort of character, almost immediately dead.
Yep.
Brando checks out about maybe 55 to an hour a
Maybe,
minute.
yeah.
Hour in.
Roughly half hour or halfway into the movie, somewhere in there.
Ron Perlman, Ron Perlman is there and doesn't do anything. And
he's essentially a bookend in the
Yep,
movie.
Yep. He's there at the end. And it's funny because he's there at the end to be like, well, we'll be fine. And then also continue to muddy the theme by going, maybe we just need to be what we are. Really? What fortune cookie did you get that out of?
Yeah, you're supposed to be like the moral center, and you're just gone.
And the little guy is there too, because thank God he's okay. As soon as all the shit goes down, that guy's nowhere to be seen, And I just expect like, well, they're just blowing things up. Like he comes out with like a suitcase and he's like, "We're cool, right? Just keep that shit away from me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go." Another guy, Mike Clark for USA Today, said the movie keeps switching focus without ever getting its bearings, and when Brando exits earlier than expected, there's a little bit of mayhem to fall back on.
Fair enough.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies I think that was definitely saved in editing. It's quote unquote saved, but definitely probably made more coherent. And here is an actual positive review from Rotten Tomatoes. Walter Chaw from Film Freak Central, which is one of those.
He has such good taste normally.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I'm a big
one
fan
of those
Walter.
internet guys. He says it's not to say that there's a lot wrong with the film, but rather to suggest that the chief criticisms of it being strange and a mess aren't among them. Being that those are true, but they're not necessarily things that you can levy at something. There's plenty of things that are strange messes.
Yeah.
The works of Hodorowski that we mentioned before, but aren't necessarily bad films.
No, and I agree.
I think I'd agree with that.
I would agree with that. Like, I think what carries those other films, though, is they have a compelling nature to them.
Yes.
That draw you into what they're telling. Like, you may not understand it, and you may not get it or anything like that, or have any concept of what they're really aiming after, but, like, they compel you to keep wanting to watch this. This is a movie that is a slog. Like, it's like, when are you getting good?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would blame a lot of that on the story too and adapting it. If that story has anything to do with sort of modern life. Guess what? Richard Stanley is apparently working on a new adaptation of the film. I say film, but he's open, I think, to TV as well. He doesn't have,
and I think it would work as like a miniseries.
I'm amazed that they've never tried to make this a TV show before, especially now that outlets like Netflix and Amazon are just pulling everything to make shows out of.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, as a
you could make
TV
out of this.
as a TV show, yeah, you could kill off Moreau early on and just have an island of this and what they're doing. Like, I would watch that.
Yeah.
You could do all sorts, and it could be like, you have the new person come in every week or whatever on a boat, and here's how they have to deal with this relationship, like
Fantasy
Love Boat.
Island,
yeah,
or like
Fantasy
Nightmare
Island, or
Island,
whatever.
yeah.
Like, I mean, you can do it a lot of different ways, but as a TV show, or at least as a miniseries, I think, even though it's a small book, like the themes I think are pretty dense, and to deal with them well, you need that space to actually.
Plus, on a TV show, let's say, and no offense to Mr. Wells, but let's say that the themes are weak in the book, like there isn't really enough to sustain more than, like you said, 100-page book. On a TV show, you can put whatever you want in there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe I'm going to compliment something that Damon Lindelof did, but The Leftovers is like a bunch of people disappear. Now what? And over the course of 3 seasons or whatever, they got a chance to sort of fill a lot of things. Well, let's tackle this. Let's tackle this. Let's tackle this. And they took a premise that is kind of a one-line premise and can do more with it. So I think we're pitching it right now. We're pitching
I think you could
Dr.
do it.
Moreau
Like,
TV
I don't know
show.
if you want to do like a 10-season arc on something like this, but you do
Sure.
something that's like 80, 90 episodes or whatever it is, 50 episodes of 2-3 seasons of we're going to tell this story of
Sure.
Moreau. I think you could do something really interesting.
What about, it's Australian, what about George Miller producing a Richard Stanley directing Mad Max Furry Road or something
God.
like that? Sorry, stupid setup. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely got legs. The thing that I'm worried about, or not worried, I guess I'm interested to see is a guy like Stanley who made 2 1/10 of a feature film, who has not made a lot. He's done shorts and he's written a script or two in the meantime. Still very young, only 50. Like, how have his powers developed? Like, why is he now the guy to do this? Maybe he could write it, be a consultant and producer on it, but then hand it off to a George Miller or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Does he have to direct?
I don't think so. I don't know if he... I am surprised, like, there all this talk of, like, giving him a show. I'm surprised somebody wants to hand him, like, I don't know how much money would be, 5, 10 million, whatever it is. I'm surprised you'd want to hand it to someone who hasn't directed anything in 20-some years. Like, that's shocking to me.
That's a big...
Not that I don't think he doesn't have the skills, but it's like, it's a muscle that you need to keep doing, and he hasn't really.
No, and we've talked about Hardware and Dust Devil before. They're two very interesting films that I feel like have a lot of early director sort of touches to them. Mm-hmm. A guy who's has seen other things in other films. He's trying things out, and he hasn't necessarily found his own personal voice yet.
Yeah, and I think they. I mean, ultimately, I think they're both kind of flawed films, but I don't think that makes them bad films or uninteresting.
No.
Like, I like them. I like
that's what the show's about.
Yeah, the flaws in them is what makes them really interesting to me. Unlike Island of Doctor Moreau, where the flaws are what make it really bland to me. Like, that's what frustrates me.
Yeah.
And I just think, like, as an artistic vision and person that can write scripts, I think Stanley's clearly very good at that. His directing skills, like, there's just not enough out there to judge it, especially with such a huge gap. Like, I feel bad that his directing career was essentially killed by this movie.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's kind of, I think film is less off for that. Like, we should have gotten 5 or 6 more Richard Stanley films by now, and I would be really interested in seeing what his career would have become.
This guy could have been the South African Guillermo del Toro. Mm-hmm. Another guy who's very...
Peter Jackson? Or...
Yeah. Del Toro was very inventive. I don't feel like he's the strongest director on earth, but he's always bringing something that you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing there. And he could have totally become that if he didn't cross New Line.
Yeah. Well,
New Line will ruin you.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of like, to me, like, ultimately the people that are like that suffer in this is not the characters in the movie. It's like the people that were actually in it and took part in it, which is what is weird about the whole production in the film is a lot of careers were ruined by this, and then you have a lot of people that were able to get around this, like.
Sure.
Ron Perlman has made a hell of a career for himself, and thankfully this didn't kill it. Like,
yeah.
But
I don't know where Rob Morrow's at, though.
He seems to be doing okay.
Yeah, is he?
He shows up in, like, I don't know, legal procedures and stuff for every once in a while.
Okay.
And stuff.
All right.
I think he's character acting, but, like, he's got
Sure.
that Northern Exposure money that I'm sure probably still comes in.
Yeah. And then again, like, coming right off a quiz show, why would he do this movie?
Yeah.
Why would anybody do this? Would you recommend this film? Just to...
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is I would recommend it to genre film fans.
Okay,
like, I think it's an interesting, at times fun, like, it's... I mean, I own it. Like, I mean, not like that's like some barometer of quality or worth. I certainly own worse movies than this, but I think it's a movie that it's interesting to watch. Like, you hear so many stories about it. It has sort of a legend behind it.
Yeah.
In that respect, I think there's value in watching the movie. I don't think it's a particularly good one. I think it's unlikely you'll come out of it going like, wow, I loved this movie.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to watch.
Yeah. Watching it again... just myself. I don't think I've seen it since I saw it in the theater.
Yeah, I don't think I'd seen it in 20-some years.
And I was just thinking, like, having all those same criticisms you did, but also thinking, this isn't like 22%. Like,
No.
It's not horrible.
No.
But I can see where they went wrong. And I still have the same problems I do with the story, but there is something about it that I keep getting drawn back to this, ooh, cool Beastmen. Like,
Yeah.
we got to be able to do something with this. and it just hasn't happened yet.
No. And that's what's disappointing. Like, I think this is source material that begs to be treated well. And, I mean, as most of Wells' stuff is, and it's disappointing that it hasn't been yet.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think we've said pretty much everything that we can say or that you can't find in another documentary. So we'll call it there. Thanks for joining us, listeners. If you want to let us know how you felt about the movie, you can tell us on Facebook at facebook.com/craft-disservices. Also, we're on Twitter at, and pay attention, Craft Disservice. No S. We ran into a character limit there on Twitter. We're also on iTunes, or I should say Apple Podcasts. You can search for Craft Services there and subscribe, rate, and review us if you would. It helps us out a lot. We're also on Google Play, Stitcher, all that good stuff. Matt, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me primarily through my website, which is wherelongtailends.com. That's tail as in like a animal's tail.
Not an American tail.
Yep.
Ironically.
And then the other primary place would be on Twitter, where I'm at WTLTE. And those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. If you go to our website, that's where all our podcasts are. You can subscribe to them there.
Great.
Which is primarily high and lowbrow, but we have a few others as well that you're more than welcome to try out.
Film shows.
Yeah, the super fun one is Cabin in the Woods Film Festival podcast, in which I force my wife to watch horror films that I love, and she yells at me.
That sounds great.
It is actually pretty fun. I don't know if it is for her, but it's real fun for me. And then Keep Watching the Skies, which is some other friends that post a podcast that's primarily on like science fiction B films.
Okay.
It started out mainly in the 50s, but it's kind of progressed to kind of all over the place.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. Thanks for joining me again on the show. And the credits are rolling. This is Aaron for Matt saying, keep it real.